What if the conquerors of Egypt were not Egyptian? For 1,000 years, the narrative was simple. Egypt was the eternal kingdom, the titan of the ancient world, but history is never that simple. In the fading light of Egypt's golden age, a new power was rising from the south, a kingdom that would turn the world upside down. This is the story of how the Black Pharaohs conquered Egypt. Our story begins not in the grand temples of Thebes, but far to the south, along the twisting currents of the Nile. This was Nubia, the land of Kush. For centuries, Egypt had looked south and seen a source of gold, exotic goods, and soldiers for its armies. They saw a vassal state, a peripheral land they could dominate. But they were mistaken. While Egypt saw a subject, Nubia saw a rival. It was a civilization with its own deep history, with kings that were ancient when the pyramids were still young. They had their own cities, like Kerma and Napata, and commanded vast wealth from the richest gold mines in the ancient world. They were a people of fierce warriors and devout believers, and they were watching Egypt, waiting. By the 8th century BC, the once mighty Egyptian empire was a shadow of its former self. The land of the pharaohs was broken, fractured into a patchwork of petty kingdoms ruled by rival warlords. In the north, a powerful Libyan chief named Tefnut was consolidating his power, threatening to unite Lower Egypt under his banner and declare himself pharaoh. The country was in chaos. The old gods seemed to have abandoned their people, and the temples fell into disrepair. It was a power vacuum, an invitation to any leader bold enough to seize it. And in the Nubian capital of Napata, a king named Piye heard the call. Piye was more than just a king. He was a devout follower of the god Amun, a deity worshipped in both Nubia and Egypt. He saw the chaos in the north not just as a political opportunity, but as a spiritual crisis. He believed the sacred traditions of Egypt were being defiled by illegitimate rulers. When the embattled princes of southern Egypt sent desperate pleas for him to intervene against the northern threat, Piye saw it as a divine sign. Amun had called him. He was to be the savior of Egypt, not its destroyer. Gathering his legendary army, famed for their skill as archers, Piye began his march north, not just to conquer, but to purify. As Piye's forces moved down the Nile, they weren't just a wave of conquest. They were a force of restoration. City after city fell before the might of the Nubian army. But what happened next shocked everyone. Instead of sacking the cities and plundering their wealth, Piye did something extraordinary. He would march into the newly conquered temples, perform the ancient purification rituals, and make offerings to the gods. He presented himself as the true spiritual heir to pharaohs like Thutmose III and Ramesses the Great. His message was clear. He did not come as a foreign invader, but as a restorer of the divine order, truth, and justice that was the bedrock of Egyptian civilization. He was restoring Egypt to its former glory, from the inside out. This wasn't a barbarian invasion, it was a religious crusade. The final obstacle was the great city of Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt, a fortress that had stood for millennia. Tefnut, the northern warlord, had fortified it, confident it could withstand any siege. He rallied his forces for a final stand. The battle for Memphis was brutal. Piye's army laid siege to the city, his fleet controlling the Nile. His engineers built ramps to scale the high walls, and under a relentless barrage from the world's finest archers, the Nubian soldiers swarmed over the battlements. The city fell. With the capture of Memphis, the war was over. The rival princes of the north came before Piye, not in chains, but bowing in submission. They offered him their loyalty and their treasuries. Piye had done the impossible. He was crowned pharaoh, Lord of the Two Lands, inaugurating Egypt's 25th dynasty. For the first time in history, a black pharaoh from Nubia sat on the throne of Egypt. The political and cultural center of the Nile Valley shifted south. Under Piye and his successors, Egypt experienced a renaissance. They built grand temples, revived ancient religious texts, and modeled their rule on the great pharaohs of the Old and New Kingdoms. They saw themselves not as Nubians ruling Egypt, but as the rightful pharaohs restoring a fractured kingdom. Yet, in a final, curious twist, after his triumphant campaign, Piye did not stay to rule from the traditional Egyptian capitals of Memphis or Thebes. Instead, he returned home to his ancestral capital, Napata, deep in Nubia. He would govern the vast Egyptian empire from his southern throne, a clear statement that the heart of power no longer lay in Egypt alone. He had unified Egypt, but his heart and his dynasty's future remained firmly planted in Nubian soil. Ruling Egypt would prove to be one thing, but holding it would be another challenge entirely. And this return to the south would set the stage for a new, incredible chapter in their story, the return of the pyramids. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to uncover more lost chapters of history, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next one.
History isn't just what happened, it's what was hidden. Welcome to the Chrono Archives, where lost empires rise again, forgotten legends speak, and ancient truths are brought back to life. From world-shaping history and powerful myths to legendary rulers and timeless civilizations, every story here is carefully uncovered, deeply researched, and cinematically told. The past is calling, will you answer? Subscribe and journey through time, one unforgettable chronicle at a time.
A new power has risen on the Nile, one from the south, from the lands of Nubia. These aren't foreign invaders come to plunder. They are pharaohs, and they believe they are here to save Egypt from itself. They were the 25th dynasty, the Kushite Kings, the Black Pharaohs. But how do you rule a land that has, for centuries, seen your own people as a subordinate nation? This was their genius. When the pharaoh Shabaka took control, he didn't impose Nubian culture. Instead, he initiated one of the most significant cultural revivals in Egyptian history. He looked back, way back, to the golden ages of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, 1,000, even to 1,000 years in the past. He saw a time of purity, of strength, of divine order, and he decided to bring it back. The first step was religion. The pharaoh was the intermediary between the gods and humankind, and the Kushite kings understood this better than anyone. They declared themselves the champions of the great god Amun, whose main cult center was at Karnak in Thebes. This was a masterstroke. By aligning with the powerful and wealthy priesthood of Amun, they weren't just gaining allies. They were claiming divine sanction. They weren't just kings, they were the chosen servants of the supreme god. Priests, who had seen their influence wane during the chaotic years, welcomed this renewed patronage. The Nubian Pharaohs poured immense resources into the temples. They repaired crumbling pylons, raised new shrines, and expanded the sacred precincts. Inscriptions began to appear, not in a new Nubian style, but in the classical hieroglyphs of a bygone era. Artists were commissioned to study and replicate the art of the Old Kingdom. They were bringing Egypt back to its roots, reviving its most cherished traditions. And this led to perhaps the most startling revival of all. The Great Pyramids of Giza were ancient history, relics of a distant past. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom had chosen hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings to protect them from robbers. Pyramids were a forgotten art, a symbol of the Old Kingdom. But the Nubian Kings remembered. As part of their mission to restore Egypt's oldest traditions, they did something no one expected. They started building pyramids again, but here's the twist. They didn't build them in Egypt, they built them back home, in Nubia. At sites like El Kuru and Nuri, a new royal necropolis rose from the desert sands. These were not the massive limestone mountains of Giza. They were smaller, much steeper, and built from local sandstone. But they were true pyramids, built to house the bodies of the new masters of the Nile. At the height of his power, the pharaoh Taharqa ruled an empire that was truly colossal. It stretched from his Nubian heartland, deep in what is now Sudan, all the way north to the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. For a brief, glorious moment, the Nile Valley was united and stronger than it had been in centuries. Commerce flourished, art and architecture reached new heights. The 25th dynasty had succeeded. They had saved Egypt by becoming its most ardent champions. History remembers them not as foreign conquerors, but as the great restorers. The dynasty that breathed new life into a civilization on the brink of collapse. They stitched together a fractured kingdom and presided over a renaissance of culture, religion, and art. Their legacy is a testament to the idea that culture and identity are fluid. That greatness can be reignited by those with the vision to see its embers glowing in the ashes of the past. But empires are like stars. They burn brightest right before they collapse. And as Taharqa stood at the zenith of his power, casting his shadow across to lands, another empire was rising in the east. An empire of iron and fire, of ruthless ambition and unstoppable military might. One that would not tolerate a rival power on the Nile. The war drums of the Assyrian Empire were beginning to beat, and their sound would soon echo in the sacred halls of Thebes, bringing an end to the golden age of the Black Pharaohs. Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. Imagine this, a dynasty born from the heart of Africa, ruling over the ancient land of Egypt, masters of a civilization that had endured for millennia. They were the Black Pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. For nearly a century, they had brought a renaissance to the Nile Valley, uniting the lands of Kush and Egypt under one crown. They built temples, revived old traditions, and ruled with the authority of the gods themselves. But far to the east, a storm was gathering. A new power was on the rise, a military machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. They were the Assyrians, and their ambition knew no bounds. They forged their empire with iron and terror, leaving a trail of conquered cities and shattered kingdoms in their wake. And now, their gaze was fixed on the wealthiest prize of all, Egypt. How could an African dynasty, no matter how powerful, face the most brutal military machine of its time? This is the story of that titanic clash, a war for the very soul of the ancient world. Our story centers on one of the last great pharaohs of this dynasty, Taharqa. He was a formidable ruler, a skilled general, and a pious man who saw himself as the rightful heir to the legacy of Ramesses the Great from his magnificent capital at Memphis. He oversaw an empire stretching from the deep south of Nubia all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. The early years of his reign were a golden age. Trade flourished, monuments rose towards the heavens, and the two lands of Egypt and Kush were truly one. But the whispers from the north grew louder. The Assyrian king, Esarhaddon, a name that struck fear into the hearts of his enemies, was marching his armies west. He had already crushed the kingdoms of the Levant, and the Sinai Desert was the only thing standing between his relentless legions and the fertile Nile Delta. Taharqa knew the threat was existential. This wasn't just a border skirmish, it was a battle for survival. He rallied his forces, a formidable army of Egyptian veterans and elite Nubian warriors, famed for their archery and unwavering courage. The first clashes were brutal. On the smoky battlefields of the Sinai, the bronze swords of the Egyptians met the iron of the Assyrians. The air was thick with the screams of men and the clang of weapons. Chariots thundered across the sands, and arrows rained down from the sky. Initially, the Nubian and Egyptian forces held their ground. Taharqa's generals were experienced, and his soldiers were fighting to defend their homes. They pushed the Assyrians back, a stunning display of resistance that surprised the overconfident invaders. For a moment, it seemed as if the might of the pharaoh would prevail. But Esarhaddon was not a king who accepted defeat. He regrouped, reinforced his army, and learned from his mistakes. The Assyrians were masters of siege warfare and psychological terror. Their infantry, a disciplined wall of shields and spears, advanced relentlessly. Their archers and slingers unleashed devastating volleys, while their heavy chariots smashed through enemy lines. They returned to Egypt with a vengeance. This time, they broke through. City after city in the Nile Delta fell. The resistance was fierce, the fighting desperate, but the Assyrian war machine was unstoppable. The path to the heart of Egypt, the ancient capital of Memphis, was now open. The battle for Memphis was catastrophic. The city was besieged, its walls breached, and its streets became a slaughterhouse. The Assyrians showed no mercy. They sacked the city, plundered its temples, and carried off its treasures. Taharqa himself was wounded in the fighting and was forced to flee, escaping the city just as it fell. For the Assyrians, it was a monumental victory. Esarhaddon declared himself king of Egypt and had a victory stele carved, depicting him holding Taharqa's son in chains. It seemed the 25th dynasty was finished, its glory extinguished in the flames of Memphis. But this story isn't over. Taharqa was defeated, but not broken. From his refuge in the south, in the Nubian heartland of Thebes, he planned his counter-move. The Assyrians had captured Memphis, but holding on to a land as vast and rebellious as Egypt was another matter entirely. As soon as the main Assyrian army withdrew, leaving only a garrison behind, Taharqa saw his chance. In a lightning campaign, he marched north. The Egyptian people, resentful of their cruel new masters, rose up in support of their pharaoh. The Nubian forces, filled with a desire for revenge, swept through the delta. In a stunning reversal of fortune, Taharqa recaptured Memphis. He drove the Assyrian garrisons out and once again sat on the throne of Egypt. It was a moment of incredible triumph, a testament to the resilience of the Nubian pharaoh and his people. The Black Pharaoh was back. This victory, however, was temporary. News of the rebellion reached the new Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, Esarhaddon's son. He was even more ruthless than his father. Enraged by the defiance, he assembled the largest and most powerful army the Assyrians had ever fielded and marched on Egypt for a final, decisive invasion. This time, there would be no mistakes. The Assyrian army that descended on Egypt was a force of nature. They overwhelmed Taharqa's forces with sheer numbers and superior iron weaponry. The battles were bloody, the losses immense. Taharqa fought valiantly, but he was facing an impossible tide. He was pushed back, further and further south. Memphis fell again, and this time, the Assyrians were determined to crush all resistance. They marched south to Thebes, the sacred southern capital, the religious heart of the empire. For centuries, Thebes had been considered inviolable. But the Assyrians sacked it, plundering the great temple of Amun at Karnak, a desecration that shocked the ancient world. Taharqa was forced into a final, heartbreaking retreat. He abandoned Egypt, the land he had fought so hard to protect, and withdrew south, back into the ancestral Kushite heartland. Egypt was lost. The dream of a united kingdom of Kush and Egypt was shattered. The 25th dynasty's rule over the northern kingdom was over, ending nearly a century of renaissance and unity. Taharqa died shortly after in his Nubian capital of Napata. He was buried in a pyramid, in the style of his ancestors, a king who had ruled one of the world's greatest empires and dared to stand against its most fearsome conqueror. The Assyrian victory seemed absolute. They had conquered Egypt, driven out the Nubian Pharaohs, and installed puppet rulers. But the legacy of the Black Pharaohs was not so easily erased. They lost Egypt, but they did not lose themselves. Forced back into their homeland, the Kushite kingdom didn't just survive. It transformed. They moved their capital further south, to the city of Meru. Here, safe from the turmoil of the north, they built a new civilization that would flourish for another 1,000 years. In the quiet deserts of Sudan, they built hundreds of their own distinctive, steep-sided pyramids, a testament to a culture that endured. They developed their own script, Meroitic, and created a unique fusion of Egyptian and sub-Saharan African traditions. They had been pharaohs of Egypt, rulers of a world empire. But in their retreat, they found a new beginning, forging a powerful and unique African kingdom that would leave its own indelible mark on history. The age of the Black Pharaohs was over, but the Kingdom of Kush lived on. Thanks so much for watching. This period of history is so incredibly rich and often overlooked. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of the ancient world. Back in Nubia, something extraordinary was happening. While Egypt's new kingdom was fading, a new power was rising from its ashes, deep in the south. This was the Kingdom of Kush, and its story is one of the most incredible tales of reinvention in all of human history. For centuries, Nubia lived in the shadow of its powerful northern neighbor. They adopted Egyptian gods, worshipped in Egyptian-style temples, and even buried their kings in pyramids. But this was not just imitation, it was a foundation. A starting point from which they would build something entirely their own, a unique civilization that would one day challenge the mighty Roman Empire itself. The stage was set for a new capital, a new identity, and a new era of Nubian glory. Welcome to Meru. Imagine this, hundreds of pyramids, not like the giant ones at Giza, but steeper, more slender, piercing the sky from the golden sands of the desert. This wasn't Egypt, this was Nubia, reborn. When the Kushite kingdom moved its capital south to Meru around 300 BCE, they didn't just change locations. They changed the course of their history. This move was a deliberate declaration of cultural independence. Why build so many pyramids, far more than in all of Egypt? Because each one was a tomb for Kushite royalty, a testament to a continuous line of rulers who saw themselves as the true heirs of pharaonic tradition, even as they forged their own path. These pyramids, clustered together, create a breathtaking city of the dead that speaks of a civilization that was not just surviving, but thriving, proud and resilient against the sands of time. The mood here isn't one of ancient ruin, but of enduring power. So how did Kush not only survive, but flourish after breaking from Egypt? The secret lay beneath the desert sands. Iron. Meru was strategically located near vast deposits of iron ore, and the forests needed to fuel the forges. It became one of the ancient world's most important industrial centers, a true Iron Age metropolis. Great mounds of slag, the byproduct of iron smelting, still surround the ancient city today, earning it the nickname the Birmingham of Africa. This industrial might fueled an economic boom. The clanging of hammers in the forges was the heartbeat of a kingdom whose influence was spreading far and wide. Meroitic iron tools and weapons were prized goods. Caravans laden with iron, gold, ivory, and exotic animals departed from Meru, creating a bustling trade network that connected the heart of Africa with the Mediterranean world. They traded with Ptolemaic Egypt and later with the Roman Empire. Meru became a cosmopolitan hub, a crossroads of cultures where African, Egyptian, Greek, and Roman influences met and mingled. This wasn't a remote, isolated kingdom, it was a global player on the ancient world stage. Now, let's talk about who was leading this dynamic civilization. While Kush had kings, the real power often lay with a different figure, a title that would strike fear into the hearts of their enemies and inspire awe in their people, the Kandake. This is the twist you might not see coming. In a world dominated by male rulers, Kush was frequently governed by powerful warrior queens. The title Kandake, or Candace as the Greeks and Romans knew it, referred to the queen mother, or sister of the king, who often ruled as regent or even in her own right. These were not just figureheads, they were commanders-in-chief, leading armies into battle from the front lines. They were shrewd diplomats and the ultimate authority in the kingdom. The art of Meru depicts these queens as strong, powerful figures, often shown as larger than their male counterparts, a clear sign of their immense status and authority. This tradition of female leadership was a defining feature of Kushite society, setting them apart from almost every other major civilization of the time. And this brings us to one of the most remarkable stories of antiquity, a true David and Goliath showdown. The Kandake who would cement her name in history was Amanirenas. By the late 1st century BCE, the Roman Empire had conquered Egypt and was pushing south, hungry for more territory and resources. In 24 BCE, the Roman governor of Egypt launched an invasion of Nubia. He probably expected an easy victory against what he saw as a provincial backwater. He was wrong. He came face to face with Kandake Amanirenas. She was described as a fierce, one-eyed queen having lost an eye in a previous battle. Instead of surrendering, she personally led her army north to meet the Roman legions. In a stunning counterattack, her forces sacked Roman-held cities in southern Egypt, even tearing down statues of the Emperor Augustus and taking the bronze head of one back to Meru as a trophy. Archaeologists actually found this head, buried defiantly under the steps of a temple dedicated to a Nubian god, so that everyone who entered would be symbolically treading on the Roman emperor. The Romans, shocked and enraged, sent in reinforcements. For 3 years, a brutal war raged. But the Nubians, fighting on their home turf, were relentless. They knew the desert, and they would not be broken. The conflict finally ended, not in a crushing Roman victory, but in a stalemate. The mighty Roman Empire, the most powerful military force on the planet, was fought to a standstill by the armies of a Nubian queen. The climax of this story is not a final, bloody battle, but something even more powerful, a peace treaty. But this was no surrender. Kandake Amanirenas sent her envoys to the island of Samos to negotiate directly with Emperor Augustus himself. The result was a treaty signed on equal terms. The Romans agreed to withdraw from all Kushite territory, cancel any demands for tribute, and establish a permanent, formal border. Amanirenas had faced down the Roman Empire and won. She secured her kingdom's sovereignty and ushered in a new era of peace and prosperity. In the aftermath of this confrontation, the unique identity of Meru truly blossomed. Free from Egyptian and Roman domination, their culture flourished. They developed their own written language, known today as Meroitic. It's a script we can read phonetically, but we still can't fully understand its meaning, making it one of the great unsolved mysteries of ancient linguistics. Their art blended Egyptian forms with purely African motifs. Their gods were a unique pantheon of local deities alongside adopted Egyptian ones. For the next several centuries, the Kingdom of Kush continued as a strong, independent, and distinctly African civilization. They had taken the traditions of the pharaohs and remade them into something entirely their own. History largely forgot them. The stories of Egypt and Rome dominated the textbooks, but the desert did not. The slender pyramids of Meru still stand today, silent witnesses to a legacy of resilience, of industry, and of the warrior queens who dared to challenge an empire and win. Their story reminds us that history is filled with powerful civilizations and incredible leaders that we are only just beginning to rediscover. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey to the land of the Kandakes. Imagine a kingdom that ruled Egypt, a civilization that stood against the might of Assyria, a power that even Rome could not fully conquer. Now, imagine that same kingdom gone, vanished into the whispers of the desert wind. This is the story of Meru, the final chapter of the great Nubian civilization and the enduring mystery of its fall. For over 1,000 years, the Kushite kings and queens ruled from the banks of the Nile, south of Egypt. Their capital, Meru, was a bustling metropolis, a hub of iron production and international trade. Its markets teemed with goods from Africa, the Mediterranean, and the distant East. Their pyramids, though smaller and steeper than their Egyptian counterparts, pierced the desert sky, marking the tombs of royalty who commanded immense wealth and power. They were not just a regional power, they were a global force, a beacon of African ingenuity and strength. But even the mightiest empires are subject to the tides of history. As the centuries rolled on, the world around Meru began to change. The Roman Empire, now controlling Egypt, shifted its trade routes. The lucrative pathways that once flowed through Nubia, bringing gold, ivory, and exotic animals north, began to dry up. The Red Sea became the new highway of commerce, bypassing Meru and strangling its economy. Think of it like a modern city suddenly finding all major highways rerouted around it. The flow of wealth, the lifeblood of the kingdom, slowed to a trickle. Compounding their economic woes were environmental pressures. Centuries of intense iron production had taken a heavy toll on the surrounding landscape. The furnaces of Meru, which once glowed day and night, consumed vast forests for charcoal. Deforestation led to soil erosion and desertification, the sands of the Sahara creeping ever closer. The very industry that had forged their wealth was now contributing to their decline. The land that had sustained them for generations was becoming barren. Weakened from within, Meru became vulnerable to threats from without. To the east, a new power was rising, the Kingdom of Aksum, centered in modern-day Ethiopia. Under the ambitious King Ezana, Aksum was expanding its influence, consolidating its own trade networks, and looking to eliminate its rivals. Historical inscriptions tell of an Aksumite campaign into Nubian territory. Was this a full-scale invasion, a punitive raid? The details are debated, but the impact is clear. The clash of these two African titans would have been devastating for the already struggling Meru. Imagine the scene. Aksumite warriors, fresh from their conquests, marching on a kingdom grappling with economic collapse and environmental decay. The final blow was about to fall. Around the year 350 CE, the city of Meru was abandoned. The fires in the great iron furnaces went out for the last time. The temples fell silent. The last Kushite rulers faded from the historical record, their final moments lost to time. The once mighty kingdom collapsed, not in a single, fiery explosion, but in a slow, grinding decline, finally succumbing to a combination of economic isolation, environmental strain, and external pressure. For centuries, silence descended upon the land. The pyramids were swallowed by the shifting sands, and the story of Meru was largely forgotten by the outside world, becoming a footnote in the grand narrative of ancient history. It's a haunting thought, isn't it? A civilization that endured for millennia, simply fading away. But this is where the story takes a fascinating and frustrating turn. When archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries began to uncover the ruins, they found palaces, temples, and countless artifacts. They found a unique and beautiful artistic style, a rich culture that was distinct from its Egyptian neighbors. And they found a script, a written language unique to Meru, inscribed on temple walls and offering stelae. They called it Meroitic. And here is the great mystery, the final silence of this kingdom. To this day, we cannot fully understand it. We can read the Meroitic script, we know the sounds the letters make, thanks to inscriptions that also included Egyptian names. We can transliterate their words, but we don't know what most of those words mean. The language itself is an isolate, with no known relatives. It's like having a book in a language you can pronounce perfectly, but the meaning of the sentences remains a complete mystery. The kings and queens of Meru are speaking to us from across the ages, telling us about their history, their beliefs, their lives. And we cannot understand them. Their final secrets remain locked away, a puzzle that has stumped linguists and historians for over a century. What did they call themselves? What were their greatest fears, their proudest moments? The answers are right in front of us, written in stone, yet completely out of reach. So what is the legacy of Meru? It's not just a collection of beautiful ruins in the Sudanese desert. It is a powerful reminder of a forgotten African superpower. It's a story of resilience, of a kingdom that held its own against the great empires of its day. And it's a profound mystery, a testament to the fact that history is not a complete book, but a collection of fragments with entire chapters still waiting to be read. The fall of Meru teaches us that no power is eternal. It shows how interconnected the ancient world was, how shifts in trade hundreds of miles away could bring a kingdom to its knees. It demonstrates the critical relationship between a civilization and its environment. But most of all, the silent script of Meru reminds us of how much we still have to learn. The voices of the past are not always clear. Sometimes they are just a whisper on the wind, a shadow in the sand. They ruled Egypt, they fought Assyria, they defied Rome. And still, after all this time, the sands of Nubia remember their name, the Kingdom of Kush, the civilization of Meru, a silent giant of African history. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into forgotten history. What other lost civilizations should we explore next? Let me know in the comments below. See you next time.
As we close this chapter of the Chrono Archives, remember, the past is never truly gone. It waits patiently in the shadows of forgotten ruins, in the echoes of ancient voices, and in the timeless lessons that still guide us today. It waits to be remembered by curious minds like yours. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the annals of time. If today's exploration of lost civilizations, mythical legends, or historical enigmas ignited your passion for the past, hit that like button. Drop a comment with your favorite moment or what you'd love to see next, and most importantly, subscribe to the Chrono Archives and continue the journey through time. Turn on notifications so you never miss an episode where we unearth buried secrets, decode ancient mysteries, and bring history's greatest stories back to life. Together, we'll keep the flame of the past burning bright. Until next time, fellow time travelers, keep questioning, keep discovering, and keep remembering. The Chrono Archives, where the past lives forever.